Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us for today's episode of RecruitMilitary Live, where we will be discussing how to upskill your career by seeking ways to learn and qualify your skills for new opportunities. As always, we would love to hear where you're tuning in from, what branch of service you're representing, and of course, if at any point you have a question during the live session, please feel free to drop it in the comments below. My name is Gabby Petticrew, and as always, I am joined by my amazing co-host, Raul Torres. How's it going your way, Raul?
Hey, good. It's warming up a little here in Dallas, but I'm great.
I'm in Arizona, so I feel you.
Yeah, I have no room to talk with Arizona over there. But hey, today is going to be a very exciting one. Our guest today actually started her military career as an ammunition specialist in the Army Reserves, and upon her college graduation, was commissioned as an active duty medical service corps officer. She later obtained a specialization in health services, human resources, and served a total of 9 years with assignments ranging from treatment platoon leader to chief of military personnel. She transitioned from the military to begin her career as a management consultant, supporting both government and private sector clients with process improvement and redesign initiatives, and with creating talent development strategies. She currently serves as the Director of Learning and Development at CareFirst, designing strategies to optimize organizational effectiveness and performance. Ladies and gentlemen, please join us in welcoming Mia Odulana. Welcome, Mia.
Hi, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon now.
Exactly. How's it going, Mia?
Pretty good. No complaints today.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We're extremely excited to talk to you about today's episode because, as we mentioned when we were first meeting and discussing the topic, we talk a lot about the transition space and how to prepare, beforehand for that transition, for translating your skills. That's extremely crucial and important to the transition process. But once you are in that dream job, once you have that position, once you're in the groove, how do you keep that groove going? How do you keep that momentum going? So we're very excited to talk today about this. And thank you so much again for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
So first, we want to jump into kind of the mindset around transition. When we're talking about functional skills to general skills. So from your perspective, what's the difference between those two?
I'm sorry, functional. I'm sorry, you cut out for a little bit. Functional
as opposed to like general skills when it comes to translating those from your military experience.
Gotcha. So that one was a tricky one for me, actually, because you have your assignment, you have your skill area, and all of your assignments are kind of focused in that area. So I'm like, I know military personnel. That's one thing I know. And that was the thing that I focused on. But really, I felt like I should have been focusing on just those general skills. How well do I do at problem solving and critical thinking and communications and relationship building? And also, I think you kind of have to put those things in perspective, because you can Google the list of most critical skills to have for a leader or in the business world or corporate America, but really it depends on the area you're trying to go into and what's most important to help you succeed in that role or that industry. So, I think it's fine to kind of be good across the board in what may be considered general skills, but I think the real success comes in really focusing in on the area that you would like to be in or are in.
Exactly. And you had mentioned something to us that was now a favorite phrase of mine, is building up your resume by breaking down your experiences or your previous roles. Can you go into a bit more detail about what you mean by that?
Yes. So I feel like the military for me, it was very structured. Like people kind of told you where to be and how it was going to be, what you were going to do. In corporate America, it's a little bit different. You get to tell your story a little bit differently. And for much of my career, I think there was only one assignment that I actually interviewed for. So it's like, whether you interview or not, you will have a next job or a next assignment.
Exactly.
And you don't really have to think about it. It's going to happen. So I didn't think about a resume. We have in the Army what we call an OER, which is an officer record brief, or an NCOER, a non-commissioned officer record brief, and it lists all of your assignments, where you've been stationed, all of your awards, things like that. And that's kind of what you use to present to people to say, here's what you need to know about me. That doesn't always translate in corporate America, because unless you speak that language, it doesn't make sense to someone. So one of the things that I had to do immediately as part of my transition, and luckily I started doing this prior to getting out, was really breaking down my resume. So it went from my first draft being to really a regurgitation of my job description to really qualitative, quantitative bullets about the impact that I was having. So when I couldn't just use military speak and jargon to kind of describe what I did, it was really sitting down with someone and then asking, well, what did you do? How many people were with you? What did you personally do versus what did the team do? How did you connect with stakeholders and colleagues around that? And really, really getting to the meat of what did you do? What was your role? What was the impact? And even more importantly, why did you do it? Because that's not something we're used to telling people. Our colleagues in the military, they kind of know why we're doing something or why the mission is what it is, right? But people don't understand it. They respect it outside of the military, but they don't understand it. And I think it was so important I'm like, I know my job, but I couldn't articulate my job. I couldn't articulate how I was successful. So it was literally going line by line. What was that actual assignment? Why did you do it? What was the impact? Who was involved? And then something else, another tip that I got is if you can explain it to your grandmother, you're good. If your grandmother can understand what you do on a day-to-day basis, you're good. You've sufficiently broken it down.
Yeah, I gotta say, it is tough. Like, you're getting out of the military, you're transitioning out, and you have this piece of paper. I know or this document that it's called it's a little different in every branch, like what you call it. But you have this and you're trying to turn it into a civilian resume. How exactly do you do that? How do you translate all of that information? And one thing in our previous conversation to set up this live that we talked about was at our job fairs. That's something that we pride ourselves in, like the exhibitors, the companies that are at these job fairs, a lot of them are veterans themselves. So, even if you're still in that transition, trying to build up your resume by breaking down your roles and you don't know exactly what you want to say yet, just talking to another veteran about what exactly you did, I feel like that is so crucial in the transition space, which brings me to our next point is just, can you tell me a little bit about, in addition to building your resume, have you spoken to your colleagues, peers about any values, any skills you bring to the table to help you in that transition?
Well, I do now. I mean, I'm not transitioning now, but I didn't. That was, I don't know if I'd call it a regret, but I wish I would have thought about it during my time, because it's like you have your evaluations and you kind of look at your evaluations like, oh, I was ranked center of mass or above center mass and I did a good job, but never actually having those more specific conversations about what you're good at. And sometimes, like even now, I have those conversations occasionally with peers or colleagues, and it's not to blow your own head up, but it's really to see how other people see you. One thing that I heard somewhere along the line, and I truly believe, is if you can't find 3 examples of how you do something well, you might not actually do it well. So sometimes having people remind you in all areas of your life, so not even just peers, colleagues, subordinates, if you have them, family members, because they all see you differently. And if there's a through line between all of those different areas of your life with the things that people can say, oh no, you always do this, you are my go-to person for that, you can check that off the list. Like, okay, that's something that I thought about myself, but it's coming through and other people are seeing that in me. So I think feedback is so important, and not only asking about your strengths, what do I do well, where do I shine, but also asking, probably like on the opposite, the tougher side of that is, where do you see me struggle? Where do you see me not behaving in a consistent manner? Or what's something I could be doing that would really take me to the next level? And kind of taking that to heart. It may sound different coming from different folks, but I think it's so, just getting that perspective is so important. And then from there, you can decide, what are the things that I want to tackle? I mean, depending on how long that list is, I wouldn't recommend saying, okay, these are the 20 things that I'm going to do. But based on how your transition is going and the industry you think you may be in, or the types of roles you'll be searching for, I think again, it has to be relative. You have to focus those things on what might my day-to-day look like, and what are going to be the most important skills that I bring to the table. So I think feedback is so important, not only during the transition, but I think it has to be an ongoing thing. One of my colleagues, she always says feedback is a gift, and it really is. It can be difficult to ask for and to hear, but it really is, because you can't see yourself, right? And I think it's so crucial to the transition journey.
Yeah,
I think we can both relate to that.
Yeah, I don't know about you, Gabby, but when Mia, as you say that, Mia, I'm just thinking about, like, that is so simple. Like, just ask others, to kind of get that feedback. And that's something, as you're struggling, making that translation as you're getting out, something so simple just slips your mind. I don't know about you, Gabby, but I found that simple, and something that I also skipped out on doing myself.
Yeah, no, that method is something, like you mentioned, Raul, very simple, but can be extremely effective. And as you were speaking, it reminded me of this very popular phrase. I know Raul knows it was very popular in the Marine Corps, as I'm sure it is probably amongst many other organizations, but it's knowing yourself and seeking self-improvement constantly, right? And by having these conversations with not just your fellow coworkers or previous coworkers, colleagues, family members, and friends, you're getting the perspective of so many people throughout different parts of your life. So they're able to see you in a multitude of capacities, whether that's, how you function at work, how you function in the day-to-day life, and what your strong suits are. And again, what maybe those weak points are that you can improve upon. And I think that type of knowledge, because I don't know about you guys, I've had an ongoing constant struggle since as long as I can remember with imposter syndrome. So things that I may be really good at, I convince myself that I'm like, oh, this is all just happening by accident. You're accidentally, like, it's a coincidence that went really well, So having other people there to not only, tell you, like, hey, these are some areas that I've noticed that maybe you could, like, work on a little bit more and strengthen, but also to just back you up and be like, no, you're amazing at this. Like, you're my go-to person for A, B, and C. And you're like, okay, so that kind of brings down, that anxiety, especially during the transition process where you're going from a completely familiar environment to, like, being thrown to the wolves, essentially, unless, you've worked in the civilian sector prior to joining the military. It definitely can be a very, very scary time. So this method of speaking to people that you know well and getting that insight about yourself that you may not even be aware of, I think is invaluable.
Yeah, it can be, yes. I agree with everything you said. And sometimes it also helps to ask for specific examples of when they saw you do that thing, or how do you see this show up for me or in our interactions together, because that's building your story. Because most good interviews are going to ask you, tell me about a time when you fill in the blank, and it's like your family and your friends and your colleagues, they're helping you to build that story where you have a multitude of examples to share from. So not just saying, oh, people tell me I'm good. I can now give you, like, actual examples of how I'm consistent in these areas. So yeah, I think it's so important. I highly recommend it. It can be tough, but I highly recommend it.
That's a good point that you make as well, because you've probably, depending on, how far up the ladder you've gone in your military experience and, how many individuals you're in charge of, all of that stuff, you maybe kind of forget of all of the dumpster fires that you've put out over the years. Speaking to an OIC, like an officer in charge of you, or a higher up staff NCO member, or even your junior Marines, you can be like, do you remember a time where stuff just hit the fan? And you're like, yeah, Staff Sergeant, remember when, like, this one dude came in and said that he lost, like, a $1 million piece of equipment, and you're like, okay, nobody panic. So I think that's another great point that you bring up about, not only your highs and your low points about yourself, but also, like, experiences that they've had with you where they've seen firsthand, that those character traits go into action. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, and that goes into our next point. Once you've landed that job, because we talk so much about the preparation for the interviews, for the job fairs, for the resumes, but once you're actually in that position and you found a great organization, what's a way that, as our CEO likes to say, Tim Best, what's a way that you can stay green and growing, keeping that momentum, that yearning for growing and knowledge and more experience? How can you keep that going?
Oh my goodness, I think there are so many different ways, and I think to your point, it's like it's been such a journey to get to the job, and you're like, okay, I didn't know where I was going to land. I'm here, and you take that sigh of relief, or you have that sigh of relief, but it's like you're just getting started. So I know for me, one-on-ones was one of the first things I did. Getting to CareFirst is like, who should I meet with? Who are the people that I'm supporting? Who am I interacting with on a regular basis? And setting up meet and greets, and then standing one-on-ones just to keep in contact with various colleagues, to hear what's happening in their world, learning what they're doing outside of just your role. So I think that's one way. Joining employee resource groups. I know a lot of companies have those where employees from, a diverse group of employees can come together around a particular interest, and they learn and grow together there. I would say volunteer opportunities. That's one thing that CareFirst is personally big on. And I've gotten an opportunity to do skilled volunteer work. So there's service-based where you're, maybe picking up trash or helping out with a garden or packing food, but also skill-based volunteer where you're able to interact with folks within the industry that you're in, or that are also in the community or communities that you serve. And you're able to kind of not only showcase your skills, but provide support and really test your skills, learning and growing more about that industry. One thing that is probably my least favorite thing, but so necessary, is maintaining contact with old colleagues and working. It's like, makes me cringe. Like, as an introvert, I'm like, oh God. Being at a function and mingling and small talk, not really my thing, but just reaching out, whether it's via LinkedIn or even just shooting an email like, hey, how's it going? Can we meet up for coffee? Or can we meet up for lunch? What's new in your world? And just hearing about, even if it's not within your industry, hearing about what other people are doing, because this whole new world of corporate work is so different. You definitely want to learn within your own lane, but just learning how this space works, because I feel like sometimes you're so insulated in the military. Everyone speaks the same language, you're doing the same thing. You have some choices, but you don't have all the choices. And then, it's this big wide world. So definitely keeping in contact and setting up dates. If networking events are your thing, that too.
If you're more of the extrovert, then
that probably works. And then I would say active and continuous learning. So signing up for courses. I mean, I think that's just the beginning of it. Learning something that you wouldn't otherwise learn, but could be helpful to supporting how you carry out the work that you do day to day. And then incorporating that into your work. Because sometimes we go to conferences or we take the courses and then we come back to our desk and it's like, oh, that was good to know. I have all these notes. Right. You don't actually do anything. So the active part of it is learning something new and then actually figuring out a way to incorporate it into how you work so that it does become a new skill that you're building and developing. So those are some of the ways that have worked for me, but it's an ongoing process. It doesn't stop. There may be slower periods, but it doesn't stop. It should be continuous.
Yeah. And I know you were talking about the corporate language. That just makes me think of like how many acronyms we had in the military, and then it kind of just doesn't stop. It's not as much in I guess corporate America,
or it's the same acronym and it means something different, which was my experience in my first job.
Yeah, I remember. I don't know why, but the first one that comes to mind is bandwidth. I swear, I was like, what does that even mean? Like, coming from the Marines, that's not even like in our vocabulary. Like, do you have the band? No, it's it's gonna get done. Yeah. I remember asking my mentor, like, maybe, I don't know, the first couple of weeks, like there were maybe some emails that I got, and I was like, what does this mean exactly? Let me reach out and ask, before I look silly on email.
The acclamation is quite literally ongoing, because I was kind of in the same shoes. My first position out of the Marine Corps was back on Camp Lejeune, working at the energy division aboard Camp Lejeune. And so they were familiar with military jargon, but a lot of our acronyms, like 3 word acronyms, were completely different in the energy field, but had the same letters. So I had to data dump my old language and use the same words, but with different meanings. So yeah, relearning that corporate language for an industry that you're in.
I don't know if it looks like Gabby's a little frozen, but I'll continue.
Yeah.
Are you still with us, Gabby?
Am I there? Am I breakdancing? No. Oh, so just so you guys know, in Arizona, we've started monsoon season here. So if my internet's going a little crazy, it's because we have 115-degree weather with storms and rain. So it's either melting my Wi-Fi box or blowing the channels away. But no, one of the things that you mentioned, having conversations with different people. What you mentioned something, and now it's kind of like, I don't know what it was. You mentioned, so these conversations that you're having with people, whether it's someone within your company, your organization, or in the same industry, in a different company, different industry, something that I learned is these conversations can be where important information and like scuttlebutt, as we like to say, can be found, like facts that you didn't know, things that aren't exactly broadcast, and like vital pieces of information or things that you may be able to apply and implement into your current position. So that was something, Mia, that you brought up, having these conversations, while it can be enlightening and just allowing you to learn more about other areas and different departments, different companies. It could also be very structural information that you can be very useful in your day-to-day.
Yeah. Because my boss said something that made me think, now that we're like hybrid and virtual since COVID and stuff like that, it's like, oh, it's so hard to meet people. It's hard to network. And she said, well, most of the information that I learned, it's not in structured meetings. So it's not about you being invited or not being invited to the meeting. It's these other conversations that I'm having and keeping up with people to learn what they're working on or what they're doing or how they're personally feeling about something. Because sometimes those meetings are so structured, there's an agenda. So you're hearing something and there's a takeaway, but kind of like what's underneath that. And you kind of get that in those one-on-one conversations where you're actually getting to know someone and you're becoming comfortable, with each other. So those conversations can lead to so many different things. But I think that specific information and those insights that you might not otherwise get, it's been invaluable. Quite honestly, it's been invaluable.
Yeah, no, I'll say
exactly.
this is all definitely under the umbrella of like green and growing. You already got your job, but like going to lunch, having those coffees, information interviews, that all applies. Like when I think of that, I think about not day one of transitioning, but leading up to my EAS date and just talking to individuals about like what specific job they do and like what do they do exactly on a day-to-day. So that's super important as well to individuals that are getting out as well.
Yeah. And then I think it's also good I still use it today, a former colleague, not from the military, but a former colleague. I'm like, this is what I'm facing at work or I'm going through. How have you ever experienced anything like this? I just feel like it's, you have to have that network of people, even if it's people you already know. You definitely want to be growing it to some extent, but even just having someone to talk to about things that have either experienced the same thing or not, and they bring a much different perspective to it as you're navigating your new world of work.
Absolutely.
And I think one thing about this whole conversation is one of the strong suits of the military community is we have such strong initiative and we put forth so much effort. And I think that's something that definitely, I think it can be very easy to want to sink into yourself and kind of maybe become a wallflower because of just how aggressive that transition can be. And you're focusing on so many different moving parts. You're like, okay, I'm just going to focus on me, myself, and I, like get adapted to this new change in life. And maybe, that, which of course, take your time to do that, to become comfortable, but don't lose that level of effort and initiative that you showcase so much in the military. I think that's what, makes you stand out so much above the crowd as everyday other candidates what makes you stand out, having that initiative, being that person who, like you mentioned, Mia, invites someone out for lunch or for a coffee, or initiates these conversations, initiates that network with someone new.
Yeah. And I think I think you're in a unique position when you're a new hire at any company, regardless of what your background is. You have a different perspective. You're a fresh set of eyes. So you're not going to see we do this because we've always done it that way. You're going to probably see the inefficiencies and have questions. So that automatically makes you value add. But then, oh goodness, I just lost my train of thought. Being curious.
I've done that yes.
Because you don't know why things are happening the way they're happening, it opens up the door for you to be very curious and ask questions about why things happen the way they do. And have we considered this? One thing, and I obviously don't know every military veteran, but I felt like for me, it's like you can see the inefficiencies. Like you have a mission and you're like, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here are the parts that are missing from this plan because you're so used to here's the mission, here's the plan, here's how we're going to execute, and getting everyone on board, that you're able to pick out those things, especially in spaces where you don't understand. And I think that in and of itself generates conversations by, just being curious about any and everything. Because sometimes people, when you're in something, you don't see it anymore. Because that's just kind of the way it is. So I think that's especially in starting a new position, that's one of the added benefits you bring is being able to take initiative, put a plan together, and be curious because it is a new world for you.
I think that's such a great point, and it brought me right back to kind of my first couple of weeks here with RecruitMilitary, because so many people said that exact phrasing to me. It's like, oh, you're new, like you have a fresh eyes, a new perspective within, especially within the public affairs, like marketing and social media realm that I'm in. That's constantly changing. We're looking for new, fresh, ways to get our mission across, and different methods. So they're like, if there's any processes that you see that we're doing now, like that can be changed, or you're wondering why it's done this way and you think it should be done this way, or you see new exciting ideas to implement, whatever we're doing, you have, just like you mentioned, being that new hire, you bring so much value to the table just from having that fresh perspective, not being, because once you're in it, after a couple months, you're on the right train, you're in with everyone else, you're bunched in and you're all flowing down the same track. But when you're that new person, while it may feel odd and may feel, a little nerve-wracking, you do bring so much value to the table and having that fresh perspective.
Yeah. I had that same experience. They were like, oh, you're fresh. You're still on like you're still on terminal leave. This is great. You're speaking to our audience because you are our audience. Beautiful. So same experience here.
Well, I know we're coming across the last couple of minutes of our live session. Mia, are there any other words of wisdom, ways to just wrap up all this quite literally amazing knowledge that you've been able to impart with us and for our audience? Are there any words of wisdom that you have for them that just to wrap this all up?
Probably easier said than done, but I would say don't be afraid to try something new. Like transitioning is new because you've been in the military for some length of time, some longer than others, but don't be afraid to keep trying something new, because the idea that you have in your head when you leave, like, oh, this is what I want to do. It may be that you spend the next 10, 20 years of a career doing that thing, but you may learn other things. Hopefully you do learn other things along the way, other things that you're interested in. Don't be afraid if it doesn't look anything like what you thought it was going to look like. And don't be afraid to try new things like that. That's what I would say. Sometimes we get so stuck either on a title or a level, and we forget about the actual work that we like doing or that we're good at. And I think it sometimes keeps us, well, I know this, I know I've had success in this one area, so let me stick with this. Don't be afraid to try something new.
No, that's a fantastic piece of information, because just that piece of advice in itself is it opens doors to so many other experiences. Because I know for me, the hesitation to branch into something new that I'm completely unfamiliar with can stop me in my tracks and keep me in my lane and keep me from branching out and learning new experience. So amazing piece of advice, Mia. Thank you again so much for joining us today. I learned so many amazing things, as I always do in our sessions. I'm sure Raul did as well.
Same here. Thanks, Mia.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed chatting with you.
Of course. Thank you so much for watching us and joining us today on today's episode of Recruit Military Live. And we will see you all next time. Have a good one.
See ya.